Everybody, I'm pre-recording this from home, and my wife and I are both working here today, and our kids are here today. So I wanted to make sure that there weren't any distractions during our class time. I am available on the Google Meet, and I am available for questions, but I wanted to go ahead and pre-record this so that there wasn't any major interruptions during the class time so I can focus on making this very clear. So looking at the agenda today, we've got a couple of things that we need to get accomplished. Number one is making sure you've completed the assignments that were due last week. At the end of the week, it was a short week, but there was a couple of big things I wanted to make sure you did. Number one was the chem chart, and that was over the Renaissance and Reformation terms that we're going to be covering this week. And then the second is the impacts of the Black Death reading and notes. If you go back to Tuesday's agenda, there's a video on there of me going over this information. So if you haven't finished that, you need to make sure to go back and get that done. Today, we're going to be looking at education in the Middle Ages and a reading with questions concerning that. And then you are going to start another No Red Ink unit on SWABIES. And today, you're going to take the pretest, that diagnostic, and we'll look at that. And then by Thursday, you have to have the practice done. And then you have a quiz on Friday. So we're going to get back into completing No Red Inks. We haven't done that in the last couple of weeks due to some assignments and a shorter Thanksgiving week and things like that. But so let's look at this today. So I'm going to skip over number one because you can go back and look at that other video or you've already completed it. So let's go into number two, which is education in the Middle Ages. So we talked about how the Middle Ages came at the end of the fall of the Roman Empire, and things slowed down and became more rural, and people were living in this time where there wasn't a lot of progress, a lot of change to education and things like that. So let's look at that. If we go into our assignment, Persuasive Technology Project, and then this assignment here, Education in the Middle Ages. And then you open up your template. It says up here, use the Google Doc template provided to complete this assignment. Read and answer the questions provided concerning the education in the Middle Ages. And so the answers can be found in the reading and should be written in complete sentences using correct grammar and punctuation. So if you hit that view template, hit submit, it will look like this. And I think it's 2 pages of reading and then 10 questions. So I'm going to do the reading with you, and then I'm going to let you go back and answer the questions as we go. And feel free to pause if you want to go and look at the questions and then answer the questions as we read, you can pause the video and do so. Or you can read it yourself and answer questions. It's up to you. But I'm going to read through it with you so that you can hear it read. So it says education in the Middle Ages at the top. And it says, at the end of the Roman Empire era, most of the educational institutes of Romans ceased to offer their services. Gradually, education was not the main concern anymore, and fighting skills became more important. Most of the rulers and politicians of this historical time gained power either through wars or inheritance, while education played little or no role in their success. The social and judicial society of the medieval period was influenced by ancient Roman and Germanic culture. However, the increasing influence of the church became the guiding force to develop the educational system in the Middle Ages. The church became more and more suspicious of Greek and Roman and Germanic culture and decided to close down all pagan schools outside of the church. Pagan schools would be schools outside of the church. Under the decree of Justinian by the year 529. The influence of the church gave rise to monasticism. Monks, priests, and bishops took the responsibility of teaching, and the whole education pattern became purely religious. So education became focused within religion. Reach of education in the Middle Ages. Bishops and monks started to educate pupils of the upper class, while education for serfs, the lowest class, and their kids were a rare chance. This was because of the basic feudalistic structure which required the peasants and serfs to work hard to earn a living and a right to protection under the fiefdom of their lords. And we talked about that hierarchy within the feudalistic structure, with where the lower groups worked to provide food and resources for the upper tier, and the upper tiers provided protection for those lower tiers. Peasants used to engage their little kids in work as soon as possible. At that time, a child of 10 to 12 years was already considered an adult. So everyone in this class would be considered an adult by this time, during that time. In addition, it was advantageous for the ruling class and the clergy to keep the serfs away from education institutions, so that they may successfully rule over them. So they didn't want them to gain education because the educated people would be harder to rule over. Okay. The fees for education, which was required by the church, monasteries, and cathedral schools, were often too high for a common serf to pay for. The whole education system was designed to keep serfs and peasants uneducated. Indeed, education during that time was very elitist, so only the top tier of people could get educations. Study books were very rare, and they were highly expensive, and hence the only way to get an education was to seek a teacher. Boys of the upper class used to learn how to read and write Latin, which was the official language of the medieval ages. Schools were run by monks. Bishops were also engaged in education system, as they used to run and manage cathedral schools. Some of the cathedral attained great fame and became centers of higher education and established themselves as universities. So, schooling system and curriculum education in Middle Ages, in the medieval period. Education in the Middle Ages was a difficult task because of the tumultuous times. So tumultuous means very like crazy, wrought with like war and hunger and just strife. It's hard to live. Tumultuous times. Frequent wars and battles often disturbed monasteries and cathedral schools and halted studies. However, most of the time, the monasteries and cathedral schools succeeded in re-emerging themselves. Children were taught in schools of monks in the age of 14 to 15. They were announced as scholars. Some of them could opt for higher studies in cathedral schools and universities under the management and prestigious bishops. Any student who could prove that they knew arts well was announced as a master of arts. Students had the choice to learn theology, medicine, or philosophy, and after mastering any of these subjects, they were declared doctors. However, very few used to opt for education to get a degree. This was due to the fact that the basic means of living were either fighting or working as a peasant. Members of nobility often preferred to learn fighting skills over arts and mathematics, while peasants and serfs had no use for higher education. All right, last section, education in the Middle Ages for women. Under the feudal system of the Middle Ages, women had little or no chance of attaining education. Education was rare for serfs and peasants, and it was impossible for a girl or woman from a peasant background to learn reading or writing. However, girls of the upper class were given the benefit of education in a few cases. There were certain obligations for women of nobility which required them to be literate, or literate meaning being able to read. However, the course of education for women was very limited, and it was controlled by the church. The general feeling was that women were secondary and they needed to serve and remain under the protection of men. Whatever education a woman could attain was designed to help her in becoming a good wife and mother in the future. Some scholars of medieval world advocated that women be, in their quote, be raised on sacred teachings. In order to become a nun, education was necessary for a girl. However, married life and children were the primary goal of most of the girls during the medieval times. So looking at these questions, what was the education, or why was education not a priority in Middle Ages? What was considered more important? So you'll be able to answer that. What organization held power in the education of Middle Ages? How did this affect education? You may need to look up monasticism. And we talked about monasticism, where monasteries, where priests and bishops and these pastors would have power in the church, and you can talk about that. Number 3, what opportunities did the common people or serfs have for education? Why? Provide 2 reasons why. And we know they had very little from the reading. Provide reasons why. 4, why was it beneficial for the ruling class and clergy to keep the common people uneducated? We talked about that in kind of the second paragraph. Why was education so expensive? What does the term tumultuous mean? We talked about that while reading. Not in the reading. The definition is not in the reading. You might need to look it up. How did tumultuous times affect education? So explain that. What opportunities did a common serf woman have at receiving an education, and why? And why were noble women given an opportunity for education? And finally, what was the primary goal of education for women during the Middle Ages? So we're going to find out tomorrow how education and all of this begins to change with the Renaissance and the Reformation. But finish this reading, answer those questions. When you're done with that, going back to Echo, we know that we need to complete the no red ink. So once you've answered those questions, you're going to jump over, and reading and answering those questions should take about 30 minutes or so, maybe 40 minutes max. And then today, your goal is to finish the pretest for SWABI. So if we go over to no red ink, let me view this as a student so you can see what it looks like. Get back into no red ink, and you should be able to just go to noredink.com, and it will, load up and log in. If you have issues with that, see me and get with me in the Google Meet. But what you should see is these 3 new lessons. So the pretest, or the diagnostic, unit diagnostic, and then the practice SWABI right here, and then the practice, and those are 2 different classes if I'm just looking at 3rd and 4th. So all you'll really see is this let me do it 5th and 6th. The pretest, SWABI punctuation correcting fragments. So take that pretest. Again, the pretest or the diagnostic is not for a grade. That is just for to see if you can test out. If you get a 90 or better on that, then you don't have to do the practices. But if you get lower than a 90 or better, you're going to go straight to the practices and start working on that. And the practices aren't due. Looking at those, there are only 6. So, and those are not due until Thursday. So as long as you get the reading done and get the pretest done, then you are good for today. If you want to get started on the practices and knock out 1 or 2, you are fine to do that as well. So if you have any questions, I'm available in the Google Meet. And good luck and have a great day.